In her Atlantic article on teaching but not loving Jane Austen, Patricia Matthews writes about coming to terms with her ambivalence towards not just a canonical, but also a beloved author. The permission she gives herself not to love Jane Austen was a permission that I never realized I needed to hear. It's okay not to love the literature you're working with. It might seem as if this is a perfectly obvious statement. Of course, you don't have to love a literary figure. But where I think it gets a bit more complicated is when a large part of your resistance to a particularly beloved author or work comes from understanding they probably never imagined or wanted you reading their work to begin with. It comes from knowing that they probably could not imagine you at all. It comes from seeing yourself, if they do imagine you, through their eyes as a character or a slur, an exotic fantasy or a subhuman terror, or again, simply not there. It's hard to love something or someone who could never love you back. If you do not love a literary work because it is racist, and if you decide to articulate your view, you might have to prepare yourself for a litany. Product of their time. Celebrates another oppressed identity. Important inspiration for a generation of new writers. Grew out of it, grew into it, aesthetic value. Okay, sure. These are not, for the most part, unreasonable responses. They are actually valid critical concerns. But my question is, why does my lack of love for a text or an author require a response? To put it another way, why the resistance to my resistance? At this point in my work, I'm actually really comfortable with not loving certain texts and authors. What I want to suggest is that if we want to be anti-racist in our research and teaching, we actually need to learn how to be uncomfortable with the things that we do love, and uncomfortable with that love itself. It might seem counterintuitive to look at love as a problem. Inherently, love is not a problem. But what comes out of that love can be. Often we give people and the works we love excuses. Product of their time, celebrates another oppressed identity, grew out of it, grew into it. Genius, distance, ignorance, theirs and our own. With excuses can come a forgiveness that is often assumed to be shared. We need to ask ourselves, what does our love, our appreciation and dedication forgive? Who does that love stifle? If we want to be anti-racist, we need to investigate the things we love. We also need to go further and turn that critical gaze on not just authors and their works, but institutions, conferences, methodologies, fields, and ourselves. The last is particularly difficult, I think, for many reasons. We are, after all, trained to remove ourselves from our work. How do we then make visible the unconscious and subconscious loyalties and preconceptions we bring to the table as critics? There are many ways to answer this question, from activism to new methodologies to creation of new fields. What I want to talk about for a moment briefly is what Thomas Nakayama and Robert Krizek recommend. They recommend investment in the concept of reflexivity. They write, quote, "First, reflexivity encourages consideration of that which has been silenced or invisible in academic discussions. Second, reflexivity encourages consideration of the presentation of research and articulation of the researcher's position vis-a-vis social and academic structures. Following from the first and second points, reflexivity encourages an examination of the institutions and politics that produce knowledge," unquote. So, in other words, look at the silenced, bring your subject position into your work, and examine the systems within which we all exist. Many of us are already engaging with reflexivity in really interesting and powerful ways, whether through movements like #Bigger6, which question canonicity and illuminate authors and works that have hitherto been in the background of the field, to conferences and associations offering space and resources for reimagining what anti-racist academia should look like, or individuals simply acknowledging the privileges and drawbacks of one's own position. But we need to do more, and we need to work to normalize this practice of reflexivity. Back to Austen for a minute. I actually love Jane Austen. I find her works and their adaptations extremely enjoyable. My feelings for her are wrapped up in joyful memories of college friendships and late night BBC marathons, a sincere appreciation for her turn of phrase and her characters, and trips to secondhand bookshops to find different editions of her novels because honestly, one copy of Persuasion just isn't enough. But I am also deliberately uncomfortable with my love. I'm cognizant of its power and do not rest easy in my appreciation. I read literature for pleasure. I investigate it, hoping to find answers to my subject position, a position that is never far from my consciousness or my work. This, I think, is a good place to be. You don't have to love the literature that you're working with, but if you do, acknowledging and examining that love, along with everything else you might bring to the roles you play in the structures of knowledge creation, opens up new avenues for us to be better scholars and better teachers. Reflexivity is meant to be unsettling, a disruption of the dynamics and privileges that have kept systems of power thriving while remaining invisible to those benefiting from them. I think that the discomfort it produces is a good thing. Among the disconcertion, you might find that what you love is not actually undervalued, rather the opposite. You might find that it is actually a vitally important part of the puzzle to understanding our world and its most pressing, urgent concerns. As we try and imagine an anti-racist, undisciplined romanticism, I suggest that we practice reflexivity and learn to be uncomfortable with the things that we love. Thank you.